Well, ladies and gentlemen, we resume our hearing, and I'm tempted to say now something very different. Certainly geographically very different, because we have now Jim Ripley, who's the Chief Executive of Phoenix Community Housing, which is in Lewisham. Some members of the Commission paid a visit to Phoenix 2 or 3 weeks ago and found it a most interesting and, if I might say so, really rather inspiring experience. And it seemed therefore only appropriate that we should invite Jim to come and talk to us. And we're very grateful to you, Jim, for coming all the way up from Lewisham, especially in this terrible weather. And let's begin by you telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Phoenix as well. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much for asking me to come over. I've worked in housing in London for 31 years, and I've worked mainly for local authorities. So I've seen, and big ones, so the inner London ones like Lewisham, Tower Hamlets, Barking and Dagenham, and I have worked on the west side in Hammersmith for about 3 years. So I know this area quite well. Phoenix. So Phoenix, for those of you who don't know, I'll just assume you know little or nothing about Phoenix. We were a partial stock transfer from the London Borough of Lewisham in 2007. And Lewisham had about 35,000 council homes in 2000. Before that, they did you remember the stock option appraisal they had to do to get up to decent homes. So the government standard on decent homes, they found that our area, which was the southern part of the borough, which looked very leafy and green, and a lot of houses, as opposed to the northern bit of the borough, which is a lot of tower blocks and big estates, it sort of concealed a lot of problems, and so the council found out it was going to cost much too much money to bring our homes up to standard, and it decided that it would look at a mixed approach to achieving the decent homes standard. So some of the stock became an ALMO, Lewisham Homes, which is still an ALMO, an arm's length management organisation, and they remained in the ownership of the council. And then some of the other stock was transferred to other housing associations, big ones like Hyde, L&Q, stuff like that. I heard Pinnacle were responsible for some of it. And then the tenants in our area, which I think was visionary at the time, really visionary and really brave of the tenants, they'd heard about the community gateway. There was only one, and it was in Preston, and they'd been to see a conference, and they saw all these housing staff. They thought it was housing staff in purple shirts and presenting to a room like this. And then they found out, no, they weren't housing staff, they were actually tenants. And their transformation took place. This was for the first time they'd ever seen an organisation fronted by tenants. And actually I shouldn't really be here. The chair and the vice chair should be here, of Phoenix, Pat and Dave, and they're both tenants. So I'm a bit ashamed to be here without them, but there you go. So they pressurised the council, and they said, look, can we set up a gateway, a community gateway, where the tenants are in charge? And the council said, yeah, okay, we'll help you look into it. But Pat will say, if she told you the story, she didn't think the council officers believed that it would ever happen. But there was a vote in 2006, and from 3 or 4 people that believed in the idea, only 3 or 4 people, tenants, they had about, I don't know, nearly 500 people campaigning for the vote, because they believed it should go ahead, and they had a vision. And it did go ahead. There was nearly 70% of the tenants that voted for Phoenix. Now, Phoenix was set up around about. I joined Phoenix. Although I lived locally, I'd never worked for Lewisham Council, so I didn't have any baggage or anything like that. I didn't know any of the people there, and I joined before Phoenix started. and I was appointed by the tenants, and my job was to do the transfer. So there was only like 2 of us and me and the shadow board, which was made up of a majority of tenants. And I had to go and negotiate with the council and agree the terms of the transfer and the legal documents, and I had to agree with the government all the terms of the transfer. A very complex process. And on December the 3rd, 2007, the transfer went ahead, and it was incredibly difficult. So it was a partial transfer, and because it was only part of the council stock, we didn't inherit the housing department. We didn't inherit nothing. So we were given, we had to rent a number of housing offices in our area, and we didn't even have enough space. So I started out working in a community centre on an elderly estate, and on day 1, on December the 3rd, we had to make sure that we had phones, computers, people were going to get paid, the money from the bank was there. And we kicked off, and just to get to the nuts and bolts of what Phoenix is wholly owned organisation. We are totally separate from the council, but we are very close with the council. We're partners with the council. So we are an industrial providence society. In a sense, I like to think of us as a big co-op. The tenants can be members, in other words, shareholders, but we prefer to use the term membership. And you have to sign up for membership. You aren't automatically a member, you have to decide to sign up. You become a member, that entitles you to vote at the annual general meeting. And the rules are very, very important. We have rules, and these are industrial provident rules, and they're specific to Phoenix. And the rules are, in a sense, the tenants fail-safe, that my staff can't do anything that we shouldn't do anything, because the rules will stop it. And the only people that can change the rules is not me or the board, but the membership, and at a special meeting or an annual general meeting. So briefly, what the board is a majority of tenants and leaseholders. There's 7 residents on the board, 5 independents and 3 councillors. They come from London Borough of Lewisham, nominated by the mayor. Now, just to answer some of the questions that you may have in your head, like what's so important about these rules? Why do they make any difference? Really, really important. I always see the similarity between, you've got 3 football clubs in this borough, haven't you? We've got Millwall. Wimbledon, do you remember AFC Wimbledon?
Yeah, moved to Milton Keynes, where I'm from.
Right, so Wimbledon, you know, what happened was that everyone thought the football club was owned by the, in a sense owned, not financially owned, but was something of the community. And then they found it moved to Milton Keynes. It wasn't anything to do with anyone. It is actually nothing to do with Wimbledon anymore. They can move it wherever they want. And that was devastating. So what they did, they set up an organisation like Phoenix. So now you've got a thing called AFC, a Fans Club Wimbledon, which is owned by the membership. And the rules say it can never happen again. They can never be bought and sold again and franchised out to Milton Keynes. Can't happen. Now, if I'm getting a bit older now, and I'm actually entitled to older person housing, and I might feel like, I want to go into sheltered housing, and I've got a mate who's a chief executive, because we all talk to each other, down the road in another housing association, and I fancy my redundancy and a big payoff, right? So we have a chat, and he says, well, why don't we, join up, and then you can go and get your redundancy. And believe it or not, it does happen. And a bigger housing association swallows a small one, and then the vote for Phoenix that the residents took is gone, because Phoenix don't exist because we're part of another housing association. It can't happen. Even if the board wanted it to happen, which obviously the board would have to agree, the 2 boards, it can't happen because the membership would have to vote for it at a general meeting. So that's a brief description of
That's
Phoenix.
very helpful, and obviously paves the way to a great deal of the work that we will do over the next months as a commission, Jim. But of course, when we went there, in what you've just told us, the ethos is very residence orientated. So let us ask you about your approach to the delivery of housing services in Phoenix. I'm going to turn to Paul Aduko, who's one of our tenant members, to ask the first question.
What is key to good customer services and high levels of customer satisfaction, and how does your organisation approach this?
You can't, in our organisation, you can't work for us unless you work for the tenants. You're working for the tenants, they're your boss. So my boss is Pat and Dave. They both live within walking distance of the office. Our office is in the heart of the community. And perhaps I should just say a little bit about the Green Man, our office, because the tenant said, we're going to be more than a landlord. And we had, there was nowhere for us to have the office in the Phoenix area. And we ended up having to move out of the borough into the London Borough of Bromley, neighbouring borough. And I spent 5 years trying to get back into the borough. And we had our eye on this place, this pub that had been burnt out and was just standing in the middle of the area. It was bang in the middle of our area. And the tenant said, we want to have a housing office, a headquarters right in the middle of our area. And so we got it eventually, and it was really hard work, and we swapped it for a block of flats that was falling down and some garages at the back with a housing association that owned it. They were going to build flats on it, and we now have a fantastic office in the heart of our community. That's the very first thing, is the office. You come into our office, the whole design, the architecture of the office is designed around the tenants. So we have a huge open plan upstairs with a hole in the floor. So when I'm upstairs, I sit there, I'm surrounded by the customer because I can hear the customers downstairs, I can see them coming in and out, and I'm right next to the call centre, and I can see and hear this. Today one in my head is about someone arranging a gas service. I get the operatives coming up, doing the gas servicing right in front of me. I can see on the screen in front of me all the phone calls coming in. I get every single complaint comes to me, so I see the complaints. And more importantly, the residents are everywhere. So, for example, if you want to work for Phoenix, the advert will be agreed by the communications group, which has residents on the all residents on the communications group. So they'll look at that. There'll be residents on the interview panel. So, the questions being asked to any prospective person who wants to work for Phoenix is going to see them right there and then. And the questions are orientated around customer care and how you're going to relate to actually working for an organisation where tenants run it. So throughout everything we do, there's a thread. We have numerous ways for tenants to be involved. So, for example, on Tuesdays at the moment, every Tuesday at 5 o'clock, we do the Phoenix Academy, and residents are invited to come and do it. It's free, and it's a 10-week course. We're on our second year now. Tenants choose to come and learn about social housing, about housing management, and it's taught by our staff who love to do it. They really love to teach about what they do: finance, HR, human resources, statistics, all of those things. So the residents get that. Induction. A new tenant is invited to a tenant induction, and as part of that induction, within the first few months, they'll come along and our staff will talk to them about what it's like for them to go through that process. The first question I ask on induction is, I don't tell them anything, I just ask them, tell me about your experience becoming a Phoenix tenant. Fortunately, the last time I asked this question, I got a really, really great response, and they said most of them have had the most traumatic time being homeless, you know, going through waiting and bidding, and then they say finally they had a good experience becoming a tenant. And we talk about induction, so antisocial behaviour, for example. It's not done from the residents, you know, us telling them what to do. We explain to them the first thing you need to do when you become a tenant is work with us and our caretakers and the housing staff to introduce yourself. And introduce yourself, please, to your next door neighbour. Because if you do, and they know who you are, explain you've got a couple of kids, explain that you haven't got carpet yet, you might be getting it in a couple of weeks, you might be doing a bit of DIY, but let me know if there's any problems. So we're trying to work with the tenants to make sure that they feel part of the community, and it's not about us telling them what to do, it's about them. We get an awful lot of feedback from tenants and residents, you know, through many different ways, and customer satisfaction is something that I think that the tenants will tell us how we're doing in many different ways. But this year we're just doing the thing that nationally is called a STAR survey, which is a big survey, like every single one is asked numerous questions, and I guess that's the main way that we will find out this year. Other things we've listened to them. So, for example, repairs. Repairs, we had a contractor doing repairs. That happened when we transferred from Lewisham. We took a lot of staff from Lewisham that 2P'd over, and we employed a lot of new staff. But some of the ones that did repairs went into work for contractor. Now the residents said we want to do it differently. We want to be in control of it. So we've taken on all the repairs staff. There's 50 repairs staff that we've taken on, and we think, well, we've heard the feedback is that it's fantastic, you know, doing lots of things.
I think Paul may have a supplementary.
Just with customer services and satisfaction, I think it was Steve earlier you mentioned 82 to 85%. Do you have any figures?
Yeah, I would say the last time we did the real survey, the big one, which was called a status survey. Right, every housing provider has to do one every 3 years, and it's now called a STAR survey. We've gone from 65% under Lewisham to 82%, and that's overall satisfaction. I don't know.
In how long?
That was in about 4 years. Yeah. And we measure satisfaction in all the other ways as well. But I think the best form of satisfaction, we had the festival at the weekend, and our tenants were very happy to come along, and there were 6,000 tenants came along at the weekend to the Phoenix Festival.
Very good. There's such a narrative here, but we've got to move on. So I'm going to turn to one of our independent expert members, Joanne Duke, who's got a question.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you design services? How you design services, particularly having regard to the needs of different types of customers and maybe different places. Do you have some science behind it, customer profiling? Do you have different routes to delivering services? Just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to respond to the thing about Lewisham. I think that was a bit rude, you know, because you've invited me here to talk about Lewisham, and I'm happy.
Now, just a moment. I think actually I speak for a lot of people in saying we've really heard enough from you. You'll have your chance. You should not be interrupting. It's terribly rude, you know. Jim, you are very welcome here, and I can't be responsible for everybody's behaviour, but most people are fascinated by what you're telling us.
And just to add, our tenants learn a hell of a lot by visiting other landlords. That include, when we were starting off, we visited a whole range, and actually we came to Hammersmith and Fulham. So you're welcome to come and visit us at any time, and I would hope in partnership, all tenants have got a lot in common wherever you are. So please, let's learn from one another. I'm sure I can learn a lot from Hammersmith and Fulham. So could you just remind me of the question, please?
Yes, can you tell us a bit more about how you go about designing services, particularly having regard to the different needs of residents and different places that they're living? Is there some science behind how you do that, and different ways and routes to deliver services?
Well, a few years, we actually inherited very little from London Borough of Lewisham in terms of customer profiling, but we now have profiling information on, I think it's about 95% of all our tenants. So we know we can cut it every single way. I can tell you exactly, I couldn't tell you now, but if you ask me a question, you say how many of this type of tenant, what ethnicity, what's their, where do they live, what's their religion, what is their gender, whatever, what's their age, what's their disability, we can tell you precisely because we know. And the tenants filled that out on a form and they update us on that. So we design the services around the information that we hold on their profile, and we do an awful lot of feedback. We've got all sorts of ways that residents will tell us. So we have a policy working party which every single policy goes to before it's agreed. Every amendment to a policy goes through the tenants working group. We have the scrutiny panel, we have the board, we have 3 community links, and at the moment what we've done is we've changed the way we actually get information. So we used to have 12 area panels, which were localised sort of forums, but now we had a big consultation period and we asked residents what they wanted, and the residents actually took a vote on it, and they voted, and there was much higher turnout than you get in the local elections. They voted to have 3 community links now, and instead of having dry meetings, we have a big event, and tenants we will come along and they'll feed back to all sorts of questions that we want to ask about. What do you want for your area? What do you want for your estate? What are your priorities? What are in your area, what's the problem? Is it antisocial behaviour? Is it traffic? Whatever. We've got, as part of that same reorganisation of resident consultation, the residents voted to have a new thing called a community chest. Previously we used to give £12,000 to each of the panels, and they used to decide how to spend it locally, but now there's £100,000 a year in a community chest, and there's a big event which is coming up shortly when residents will be invited along, and the shortlisted applications for the community chest are decided on by a vote on that day, and they will decide on a whole range of great ideas. So the way and also finally on feedback, there's a whole range of feedback, so learning from complaints is something that we take very seriously, so we changed it. The new scrutiny panel have just been looking at repairs, and this is all tenants, and they've done an amazing job looking at how we do repairs, and they've come up with a whole load of recommendations that's actually been agreed by the board and gone to our audit committee as well. It's going to be monitored by our audit committee to make sure that we implement the changes that the tenants recommended on repairs.
Fine, I've got to move on fairly quickly, so I'm going to turn to Matthias now, who's one of course of our leasehold members.
Thank you, Jim. You hear me?
No.
Okay. Hello? Thank you, Jim, for first experience. Thank you, Jim, for giving us some of the experience from Phoenix. I just want to find out, what is your view about how far housing service should go beyond the basics of tenancy enforcement? And then secondly, what are the arguments from your experience for a preventative or supportive approach to housing management? Thank you.
Well, firstly, we've got to get the basics right. I mean, any landlord, it's no good doing all the fluffy stuff around the outsides unless you get the basics right. So it's really, really important to get the basics right. And for us, that is repairs, repairs, repairs. The tenants tell us that all the time. And we've put a lot of money and a lot of effort into getting repairs right. The next thing is like keeping the estates clean and tidy. And we've one of the first things we did when we got Phoenix, we actually upped the grounds maintenance contract. So if you come onto our estates, now, you'll see that the hedges and the grass cutting is so much higher standard. The cleaning with the caretakers, we've invested an awful lot in training and making sure that the caretakers are able to do a really important job. So moving forward from getting the basics right, ASB, antisocial behaviour, is a big problem for many of our residents. We've spent a lot of time making sure that the staff respond really well on antisocial behaviour. And we've also spent a lot, we discussed it earlier about access. The residents said, how did you want to be able to access services? The residents said that they wanted to access it through their office, which is what they do. And going out, if you want a visit, we've got, our housing offices are...
I'm sorry, Jim, but will you kindly be quiet? Nobody wants you to do this. And you are interrupting the involvement and attention, not only of the Commissioner, but also of everybody else here. So don't be so self-centred and just listen. Instead of hearing my opinion, I tell you what, if this will quieten you, let us say that we would be delighted to have you as a witness in front of us at a future meeting. So we kindly consider that, which is perfectly serious if you have anything serious to say. But in the meantime, just let us get up at our meeting, please. Sorry, Jim.
I'm just trying to recall the second part of the question. So it was I remember, yeah. Get the basics right, and then around the edges, very, very important stuff that's become even more important with the welfare benefit reforms and bedroom tax and things like that, is that we've spent a lot of time training the staff and getting specific expertise around supporting our residents. So I've got a tenancy sustainment person, and she used to work at the Citizens Advice Bureau. There is nothing she doesn't know about supporting residents. So she's one of the most popular people because she can really help in a whole range of things in terms of debt, getting back into work if that's what your area is. But we have a lot of debt in our area. We've got 3 food banks in our area, and we work very closely with them. In the housing, in the hub that we've built, the residents have built, we have a credit union, Lewisham Credit Union, which is one of the biggest in the country. So there's 11,000 members, and they provide ethical loans, and you can get bank accounts with them, and it's very important for our tenants. They can come and see the housing staff, and they signposted to go to the credit union. We have a training kitchen as well that's part of the council, and that they provide training for example, for our vulnerable people in cooking, and you'd be in healthy cooking. And at the moment she's one of the cooks who's showing you how you can cook a healthy meal for £1.60. So that's what they're doing. We pay for the Citizens Advice Bureau to be in our office as well, and they provide a brilliant service. We have a job club, which is by Job Centre Plus, which is on every Tuesday, and every time it's just packed out with people. And we have the tenants also do voluntaries. They come in and volunteer, give up their time to have an internet club. So if you want to learn internet skills, come into the Green Man, and they will train you up on how to use the internet.
That's terrific, and I've got to move on at this point, Jim, but I think actually your answers relate very much to the final question, which is from Lorna, who's one of our tenant members. Lorna.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes?
What evidence is there that things like tenancy and family support, like employment initiatives, financial inclusion, health and well-being, are relevant to housing management performance?
I think it's what we've learnt, and the tenants have taught us, is a sense of place and community are really, really important, and pride. And our area has suffered greatly from that, and you probably haven't even heard of the names Bellingham, Downham and Whitefoot. That's our area, didn't even have a name. And now there's a lot more pride in that area. we had suffered from the worst deprivation amongst the worst performing areas in the country, and what we've done is we've spent a lot of time trying to work on employment and training. So for example, we've now used one of our community centres. The tenants were quite happy for it to become a construction academy, and this year about 150 local people will learn skills in construction in our community centre opposite our building. Lot of people, I couldn't give you exact stats, we keep performance indicators on how many people we help back into work, and we're doing this programme called Bouncing Back, which is for the over 50s, because they're one of our biggest target areas at the moment. And the pub, one of the things we're able to do is our area, every single pub was shut down in our area, or burnt down, and the only one that was left was the majority of the building is burnt out, and it's called the Fellowship Inn, and the tenants decided to buy it, and instead of it being demolished and turned into flats, it's now the tenants have got £4 million from the lottery fund, and it's going to provide 70 jobs and 60,000 visitors a year, and that's the sort of thing that we have seen. Phoenix also have a huge amount of apprenticeships, which we work with the Mayor of Lewisham on, and promoting apprenticeships and employment, and we've seen that as very important.
Lorna, have you got a supplementary on that?
I was just saying, it sounds like you spend a lot of time invested in the community, and it sounds very empowering.
Just to add to that, we're able to do things that the council can't. So if we were still part of the council, we wouldn't have been able to get millions of pounds worth of funding we built a local park, which is in our area, which the council gave to us, and we were able to get loads of funding for it, which the council couldn't. The pub, the council would never have been able to get that money, and we're working on all sorts of initiatives that bring in lots of grant funding.
Steve, Jim, stay there, because we come now to the supplementary questions, and we're going to ask all of the people who have been on panel. So can we rustle up chairs for Stephen and Janie and Ros and Susanna, and join Jim on the front bench. But in the meantime, Jim, let me say tremendous thanks for coming here and talking to us about Phoenix. The point is that we can learn lessons from as far away as Lewisham, and that clearly you have achieved a very great deal in terms of the security and in terms of the benefits to your residents. So it would be absolutely sensible for us to take your experience into account and to consider whether that is an experience which could be repeated here in Hammersmith and Fulham. So we are immensely grateful to you, and I'm sure that your narrative will make fascinating viewing for people in the borough who come to look at our website. So if people could get together now, there's a further seat at the end. Right. Thank you all very much indeed for coming back. We'll do this for about 10 minutes to about 1:15. It's been a long session, but I see that some of my colleagues have already got questions that they want to put to you. So let me turn. Anthony, you haven't had a bite at the cherry yet, so why doesn't Anthony Mason, who's one of our independent experts, kick us off?
Is this working? Yes. I'd actually like to pick up a theme from the last question, because I think this is a theme about looking to the future of housing management as opposed to thinking about how good or bad things were in the past. So I am interested in the extent to which tenants and officers working in housing can see housing management developing as being something that wraps itself around tenants rather than wrapping itself around properties. So what more can we do for the people who live in our homes to improve their life chances and so on and so forth? Because I have a sense that's one of the keys for the future.
You're not all obliged to speak, you know, so why don't we have one from each, or whoever's inclined to do it. Stephen, do you want to have a go?
Happy to, Chair, thank you. I think we would welcome the opportunity to do that as officers. I think one of the constraints, which was a part of the theme earlier, was that we are set up in such a way that we are now currently learning to sort of adapt to move it forward. And I think with the engagement that has been taking place over the last sort of 9, 10, 11 months in terms of the residents, we're starting to actually get more feedback in terms of what residents need and what residents want moving forward. I think the other issue from where we come from as well is that I think we need to explain ourselves better in terms of what we can and can't provide, because I think there is a perception sometimes that within the housing department we can do everything and be everything to all people, and I think we have to have that mutual understanding of what we can achieve, and I think that will be a good starting point. There is still the statutory obligations that we do have to provide as officers, and I think we mustn't miss that sort of side of what we do. But I think we would welcome, because we are in people's lives 365 days of year, and that's probably more than any other department within the council. And I think from a resident's point of view is that when we're actually dealing with individual residents' issues or problems or concerns, what we want to be able to give them is the confidence knowing that it's going to get resolved. And I think the point that was made a couple of sort of questions ago was that, you know, most people want to be passionate about where they live, you know, and how they enjoy with their community. And I think if they feel they have that support, and I think it is a support function, you know, secondary is the knowledge that we all have. And I think that's what we would welcome in terms of moving it forward. And I think the level of engagement at the moment is such that it should actually get us to that position.
Susanna or Ross, anything that you'd like to add?
I just very much liked the fact that you have employment and training on your estate, and it also breaks down the divide, which I think we still have a bit here, them and us. It's the residents sort of and the council, and yours seems to sort of mesh together, and it's very much a two-way process, which I think is very healthy.
Just pass the mic over in that direction. Ross?
I'd like to add to that as the fact that it's the strapline to the tenants' conference that we held was moving forward together, and I think that is very important, because I agree with Suzanne, it's seen as them and us, and I think it's really important that we do move forward together, because together we can achieve things, and that's apparent from what you've said there, that it's a situation. And for instance, on training, and I have banged on about this for ages, that when new initiatives come up, that tenants and residents and officers are trained together. So it's not residents being trained or shown what's happening, and then officers being shown and trained what's happening. It's a situation they're chained together so they can thrash it out in the training, and everyone moves forward together on an even keel.
Jim, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think anything's possible when the tenants tell us that's what they want. So, for example, two very quick examples. We're disused allotment, lots of disused allotment sites, and one of them they've turned into a community garden with our help, and I've got the first 7 bottles of wine on my desk, which they paid for, and we're going to have it in a wine party when we pick next year's grapes this September. And the second one is we would never have been able to build what we're doing now, and because the residents said we wanted extra care housing, and we're building our first scheme, which is 62 units for elderly people, really beautiful flats, award-winning design now, that is going to have a restaurant and everything there for elderly citizens.
Thanks, Jim. Chateau Lewisham, that's unexpected. Paul, you wanted to come in.
Probably one for Stephen and Jane again. You talked about measures of your services and doing surveys about how the services were and getting negative feedback that wasn't really helpful. I want to know, one, how is that feedback treated? Is it disregarded entirely as not relevant at all because it's not helpful? Second part also, you also talked about not really actioning some of the feedback at this stage. What plans are in place to kind of respond to the feedback you've been getting?
Okay, one of the points that I didn't sort of quite clarify earlier is that the level of engagement is a percentage of the overall sort of service that we provide. So one of the things we want to do is actually go out and get interaction with a great many more people, more residents, to actually get a true picture of what the service is actually going to be provided. As I touched upon earlier, Councillor Coleman has made it quite clear that this year customer service and, if you like, satisfaction is going to be key in terms of trying to identify moving forward. And he's actually commissioned us and my officers to actually work with a group of residents to actually really look at what we want to try and achieve and what we actually want to capture as part of that sort of ongoing engagement. If you like, the ultimate for me would be, if I can, is to engage with the majority of people across the service that we provide, and I think that will give us a true picture, and then we will learn lessons from some of those, if you like, historical mistakes. I mean, one of the points that was made earlier was about, you know, it's quite emotive when residents are expecting something to happen and failure happens at a very, very low level, and they're the sort of things we actually want to try to sort of iron out moving forward. We will never, you know, I'll say now, we will never absolutely get everything perfectly right, because that's the nature of the world we live in. But if you can actually start identifying that we're actually learning and continually learning from the lessons that people are bringing to our attention, then I think that's where we want to get to. And at the moment, I can guarantee you, we don't actually learn lessons from all the things that we get wrong. And I think that's part of the issue. It's about greater engagement with the residents, and then a learning and feedback process that we actually learn from the lessons, and then tell the people that have actually given us the information, we've learned from this is what we've done, and this is the action plan that we've put in place to further develop that. And I think it's that two-way communication that we need to further develop as well, because at the moment we don't actually respond to a lot of the, if you like, the concerns that are raised. We respond to some, but not all of them.
Just say, you said you don't respond to some of the things you've done wrong.
Sorry, we respond to everything that comes through in terms of a complaint or inquiry in the right way. But what we don't do is we don't capture that level of information and then feed it back to the wider community about some of the lessons learned. You know, like similar to a you said, we did sort of approach. At the moment, communications is limited in terms of how we engage. We did a similar exercise at the tenants conference in terms of feeding back and giving some general information. We need to get smarter about how we capture the information, respond to it, deal with it, and then move on, but also about feeding that information back. And at the moment, that communication gap, I think, is also causing us the problem. Because if people don't believe that what they're telling us is actually being listened to, that equally gives people that poor perception, and we need to really get to grips with that.
Okay. Susanna, did you want? You're not obliged. You're not politicians. You know, you don't have to talk.
Just very briefly, the communication that goes on now depends on literacy, and I've recently discovered, because my daughter is going to volunteer as a literacy tutor, that there is a surprisingly high level of illiteracy in the borough, and how you can address this, I don't know, but it needs to be addressed. That people who do not have reading and writing skills are simply being left out of most communication.
I know exactly what you mean. My wife was once a literacy tutor in the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. Anthony.
Hello. Yes. I knew I was going to be asking a supplementary question. This is aimed at the two officers. And I wrote down two words, well, three, but responsibility and accountability. I wanted to ask you, because I live in Shelton, as you know, and we have a much more direct contact with our housing officers. And one of the issues we have is their responsibility to us and how they are accountable for our health and well-being. And I'd like to know how you see that going in the future, how you make housing officers, and this can apply to general needs as well, obviously, because our first point of contact is usually with our local housing officer, either in the housing office or on estates. So what I'd like to know is how you see responsibility, greater responsibility and accountability by your officers going forward.
Okay, I think from a senior officer point of view, I think one of the issues that I've come across since my time at Hammersmith and Fulham, I think there's one of a difference in culture. I think there are some officers alike and some that have come and gone that don't really understand the level of engagement that is required of their specific post. So there are a lot of good officers. And I think, I mean, Janie might want to sort of comment on this. And again, back to my earlier point, there's been a lot of churn. There's been a lot of turnaround in staff, and I think it's about building those relationships, but also empowering staff. And I think historically, some staff have felt not empowered or not able to make the decisions that will actually add value to the residents and the community that they serve. So I think us as senior officers, you know, along with the administration and indeed residents, in trying to change slowly that sort of culture. So we are committed to obviously giving people the tools and the ability to make differences at all levels and to feel confident in their ability to sort of do that. And again, I think there is a cultural issue simply because some people feel nervous about making decisions. And one of the things I've always said to all of my staff is that if you make decisions for the right reasons, you know, don't be afraid to sort of do that and sort of taking it on. But it does have to be an ongoing process. And you do tend to find that, you know, there are every so often individuals who just can't make that leap. And I think from our point of view, in terms of delivering services, we want people who are there to make a difference to residents in their daily lives, but also not feel afraid in terms of making those sort of changes. So we are committed, and I think in terms of the new administration, again, about making improvements to certain parts of the division, I think you will start to see a change. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but we are obviously moving in the right direction.
Stephen, thank you for what I thought was a very interesting answer. Very conscious of time now, and I've seen two of my colleagues have caught my eye. I've got Joanne and then Shirley. Joanne, why don't you go first?
Thanks. Stephen, just building up from the issue about staff and development, training, engagement, can you tell us a bit more about how you go about doing that at Hammersmith and Fulham, and perhaps what your aspirations would be for the future to really build skills and capacity and culture?
Okay, yes. Well, obviously, like any organisation, we have the appraisal process. So there is the ongoing engagement on a regular basis on a one-to-one level in terms of setting individual targets to meet the overall objectives of the sort of the organisation. In terms of housing, obviously, customers, the residents, and tenants and leaseholders are primary to the work that we do. And I know that my point was picked up on earlier in terms of the generic approach, and I think as housing professionals, you are skilled in a range of activities, but you're not necessarily qualified in any one sort of particular area. And I think one of the things we try to instill with our officers in terms of moving forward is about the level of knowledge that they have has to be partly down to the nature of the job that they do, but also it's about their own personal development and what their aspirations are as officers to not only promote themselves internally. And unfortunately, sometimes we do actually get some really good staff who then go on to bigger and sort of greater things. So it's about their own individual personal development, and some of those are residents in the borough as well. So it's twofold: their community sort of engagement processes as well as their own personal development. And then I think it's the traditional sort of management to make sure that they are given the support. And touched upon earlier, you have to make money go further nowadays. So it's looking at activities that you can share. The point that Ros made about maybe sharing training with not only resident and community groups, but officers as well. We also look to leverage in additional training through our partners, so through Mighty and Pinnacle, where they can also invest, not only from a training perspective, but an apprenticeship perspective, but also putting some money, and the money that they earn through the work that they do within the borough, the contracts are set up in such a way that they have to reinvest back in. So again, as an example, Mighty employed roughly 20% of their workforce live in the borough. So that's the sort of aspirational side of it. But back to the sort of individual personal development, there will always be an element that for whatever you put in place, you won't always be able to get everyone to get to grips. And I think they're the sort of managerial conversations that we have to make sure we put the best people in the best places to serve the customers as a whole. So it's an ongoing process, but one of the issues we have to do is trying to get the broadest of training across all of our areas. And there are some specific areas in terms of dedicated officers, especially in supported housing, that need to know that extra bit, extra level of work. But we are keen to continue to encourage, and where possible, we will leverage in and obviously work with the residents as well.
And last but by no means least, Shirley.
Hear me now? Yeah. Jim, particularly in Phoenix, obviously being a resident-led organisation, that means you're absolutely dependent on getting enough residents actively involved and a broad range in order to, or ways of those residents representing all residents. Do you have any advice for us? So irrespective of whether the residents in this borough elect to stay with the council or to go for a community gateway or some other kind of stock transfer, how do you go about doing that? And how do you envisage that being a problem for the future? Has it been a problem in the past?
I remember I was invited to Sutton with me and Dave, the vice chair, when they were looking at a similar thing, and the tenants said to us, no one here is going to get involved, and it was all really doom and gloom, and they said, well, Dave said, we only started off with 3 tenants, and then it was hard work, but we believed in it. And Sutton decided not to go for something like that, and they got taken over by a big housing association, and I think it was a terrible shame. And I'm sure they're getting a good service, but there's a fantastic opportunity for tenants to take control of their areas and to work in partnership with the staff. And one of the most exciting things I've seen recently is we had a staff election, because we have tenant elections. So anyone can stand up to be a tenant representative on the board, and you go through a process of election. We're just coming up to it, but we recently put a staff, and the residents agreed to have a staff rep on what we call the Gateway Committee, and loads of staff got involved. And it's important that the staff encourage the residents as well, and they feel that they work together. And I think that's something we really learned, and it's been a great thing. When we started off, there was people who only thought, well, the elderly, it was always the same profile. The elderly, generally one type of our community was being more active than the other. I said, how can you get younger people involved? How can you get people with children and all that? And over time, through lots of hard work and different things, like the academy, where we've got much younger people coming through, a whole range of people got involved through the academy, people that are at university, people that are working elsewhere, people that are at college. So they've brought their children along, and they've joined the new scrutiny committee. They're going to be the new members. And the tenants are very conscious, as we all are, of succession. So we've been going 7 years now, and the chair and the vice chair and a number of the tenants have served their term in a year. And we've worked very hard to bring up other people. So there's always someone who's shadowing someone, and the tenants are brilliant at making sure that there's someone that's going to succeed them. And it's about encouraging people. So all I would say is on that, if people believe in something enough, and you have a vision and you can inspire other people, then I would say anything is possible. So you get many people involved.
Well, there's a good ending. Anything is possible. Will the witnesses just stay there, because I want to say thank you to you in due course. Now, you'll see on your agenda that I'm supposed to provide a summary and conclusions. Well, you'll be intensely relieved to know that I do not intend to speak for more than 60 seconds. But just to say that a couple of days ago, as part of my tour around the estates of the TRAs in the borough, I was on Philpott Square, and I was talking, I think, to the chair of the TRA there. And we came away from that meeting saying there are 3 things that need to be better. Consultation between residents and the council needed to be better. The communication, certainly between the council and residents, needed to be better. And coordination between departments certainly needed to be better. So there were 3 C's there. But as the evening has gone on, and we'll all have drawn a lot of different conclusions from what we've heard this evening, 3 more C's have occurred to me. One is closeness and the importance that if you are providing offices and providing services, they need to be close to people so that people can access them better. That's another C. Then a point I think that Ros raised, which is continuity. You don't want the officers chopping and changing all the time. You want to be able to deal with one officer who knows the background of the case, you know, and is on top of the case and can actually deliver the result. So that's 5 C's, and then there's a final C, which is the C that Jim has, you know, absolutely brought to our attention this evening, and that's the C for community, because community is at the heart of it all. I think in Phoenix you have achieved that. So I say that we have the 6 C's to take away from this meeting. There'll be many other conclusions, which by the way is another C. But I can assure you that the Commission, which is the 8th C, will certainly be drawing its conclusions from this meeting. So can I say to our witnesses, Stephen, Janie, Susanna, Jim and Ros, thank you very much indeed for taking the trouble to be here on our first public hearing. Can I say to my colleagues on the Commission, well done. Thank you very much indeed for making it such a good evening. And can I say to our audience, even the naughty ones, thank you very much indeed for making our first public hearing such an excellent start and such a great success. So without further ado, my thanks again, and I declare our Commission meeting well and truly closed. Thank you all very much indeed.
Good luck with it. David.
Well done.